This video will cover how to use Netbeans as your default IDE when working with Joomla, and in particular how to use it when you're working with the bug squad in order to connect with the trunk and check out the SVN and find bugs and patches and work on all that stuff. The tutorial does assume that you understand how to use SVN in the basic form at least and are familiar with the rest of the process. It will only cover how to use Netbeans instead of another IDE or another subversion client. So first, let's make sure we have Netbeans downloaded. You can find it at netbeans.org. Click on the download link, and I recommend the PHP version, which has everything that you need already for PHP development, like the syntax highlighting, plugins, and things like that. If you already have Netbeans, make sure that all the PHP plugins have been installed. So from here on out, I'll let you download and install that, and pause it and come back as soon as you're done. So I'm going to jump straight into Netbeans now. And right now we have no projects, and that's going to be our first order of business. So File, New Project will help us create a new project, and it's going to create a new PHP application. Since we don't have existing sources, which means we don't have files prepared already, we're starting with a blank canvas. We'll just hit Next. And I'm going to call the project Joomla SVN. Now I want to change the sources folder. Right now it's trying to put it into a different directory, but I want it to be inside of my web root for my local host. And that happens to be at this address for me. So the first part here is the root of my public viewed local host, which is just for testing purposes on my machine. And then the folder Joomla_SVN is where I want to install my Joomla 1.6 currently to work with it. Make sure the default encoding is UTF-8, that's a requirement, and PHP version should be 5.2. You could put 5.3. And lastly, check this box, and if you wish to change the default folder, that's fine, but basically what it will do is help keep the sources folder clean, because we won't want Netbeans to put any extra files or junk inside of our sources folder. Sometimes it adds little files such as a file history to help you, but in the end these extra files become clutter if they're actually in your source folder. So this puts them somewhere outside and indexes them later outside of the project root. And we don't need to worry about steps 3 or 4, so let's go ahead and click Finish. And a new project will be created. You'll see here the first thing then we're going to need to do is actually check out Joomla. So we have right now no files. We'll need to come up here to Team and check out. What it's going to do is ask for the repository URL. It's already in here, but if you're unfamiliar with where to find that information, if you go to joomlacode.org and then click on the Joomla project itself, you'll see the SVN tab and then Access Info. And that's going to have all the information about where you can find the current trunk. And if this link happens to change, this is probably the most likely place to go to find that information. So this is the URL I already have input. And in our case, we're going to have anonymous access because I only have read access. Only the core has the ability to actually connect and apply changes. So it verifies the repository exists and will ask you what to check out. And so we want to check out the trunk in this case. And you can see here where the working copy will actually be located. It'll be inside of my Joomla SVN folder /trunk, so it'll actually be in a subfolder. In my case, I'd like to skip the trunk, and you'll see the working copy now will be put into the root of the project, so that I can type in localhost /Joomla_SVN and actually see my Joomla installation. Otherwise, it would have to be localhost./Joomla_SVN/trunk, and then you would see it. Make sure that your local folder is the same as your project folder. If you've been working with it before, it might remember your last folder. So everything looks good. We'll hit Finish, and you'll see down here it says Checking Out. And it will take some time, but if I right-click, there's a Show Output option that you can see. Let me open this up a little bit. It's going quite quickly, but it's going to take a little bit of time to download everything. So I'm going to pause until it's finished. Okay, you can see here now that it says checked out, revision number, and finished. So now that we have finished our checking out, I'm just going to close this little panel. And you'll see on the left a full Joomla installation folder like you would see if you downloaded the beta or the current version. You would see this is what the folder structure should look like. With one exception, you have an extra folder called tests. This is where we're going to see a lot of things called unit and system tests. And if you're unfamiliar with those, basically they're automated, programmed methods in order to test the functionality of Joomla, so that if somebody changes a piece of code, these tests can be rerun, and if anything breaks, it should alert us to that possibility of where that problem exists. So that's one thing that's changed. So what we have here is a complete install plus these tests, which if you're going to be doing the unit testing and system testing, you'll know what to do with those. We're not going to cover that in this video. So what we're going to do is actually jump to our browser, and I've already opened up the index. I'm just going to refresh, and you'll see here, wow, we can install the thing we just downloaded out of the SVN. So I'll let you go ahead, go through and install it, and we'll jump back into it in just a moment. Okay, I've jumped forward, I've installed. Now we have a problem because we checked out the copy, but now we have to remove the installation folder, and now what do we do? So one little trick is that when we go back to the Netbeans IDE, if we were to rename it through Netbeans, it's going to try to rename it through the SVN process, and we're going to have some possible conflicts with that. And basically, long and short of it is, it's going to try to commit those changes, and you're unable to commit those changes, and sometimes you have to do a lot of updating, reverting to get worked around this. So what I do is I open it up here in Windows the Explorer, and I just rename it outside of my SVN client. Yes, you should not do this normally, but I'm going to. It's the easiest way that I've found to do this. So now our installation folder is still there. It has been renamed, and what I'm going to do is before I update the SVN again, I'm going to rename that back to installation so it doesn't re-download the install file, the whole installation folder again and again. So let's go back to Netbeans, and you'll see that it's reflected that change as well. And if we go back to our site, we can actually see that we have a working copy of Joomla here. Now obviously we need to start using this to find our bugs in order to test them or to replace our patches to see if something's working or hasn't been working. So now that we have a working copy of Joomla, let's go over a few of the basic SVN features that you have with Netbeans. So as you probably noticed, if you click on Team, you'll see a lot of different options here. You can check out another copy of something. You can show the changes if you have. I'll just click it and show changes. There are no local or remote changes here, but if there are changes, it will display a list of what those are. And you can see differences. You can update the SVN, which is good to do, probably daily. That's how often the trunk is probably committed to, especially during a beta and release cycle. Right before anything is changed. So you want to make sure you have the latest version of everything. Here are the two patch options, which we'll get to in just a moment. You can copy things, you can switch or merge. If you're familiar with all of these things, they should make sense exactly how they work. A strange thing that the Subversion submenu has a lot of the same things as the main team options here. So just be aware that they're the same menu items. I don't know why they function that way. You can also access those by right-clicking or whatever the appropriate thing to do on your system is and going to the Subversion menu item. You'll notice that some things aren't available, like if there are no conflicts, you can't resolve conflicts, which makes complete sense. If you ever want to revert your modifications, which is a very practical thing to do, especially when you're working with a read-only service. If you change something on accident, you could be causing a lot of problems. So revert modifications is very important. Lastly, before we go and apply a patch, I want to make sure that it's clear that when you're working with the trunk like this inside of a program, particularly with Netbeans, you're going to be wanting to create a patch if you're working with a bug squad. And so the important thing to note is that anything you change inside of the entire file listing here will be reflected in that patch. And so the key is that when you check out, you have a version of the trunk. You want to make sure you only work on one patch at a time, finish that patch before moving on to something else. If you're working on two at the same time, then your patch will always pick up the entire file listing, and it will try to make a big patch for both of your problems. So you want to focus on one patch at once, finish it, and then jump to the next. So without further ado, let's go ahead and apply a patch that I created. Alright, here's the tracker, and you can see here it's a simple concept, so it's not a major code change. Somebody reported that some of the manifest files were indexing this PHP file, but this file doesn't exist. And it's actually should be index.html. So I submitted a patch, and it's been accepted, and basically what it does is it changes all of those files that have the incorrect index declaration. So what you need to do is come down here to the bottom of the tracker, and you'll see the patch file itself. So click on it and download it, and you need to save it somewhere on your hard drive where you can access it. So go ahead and do that, and go back to Netbeans, and you want to click on the source files. This is your root, and you always apply and you always create a patch from the root of the installation. So the first thing we do is come to Team and apply a diff patch. You'll see this is the number from that I downloaded, and you click patch, and what it will do is tell you whether or not it's successful, and the patch file just lists all the changes that were made. So you can say, yes, I want to view applied changes. I warn you, in this case it's actually going to be quite a few files. Several dozen. Oh, wow. But I want to show you a little bit about the way it displays these files and how you can use this to your advantage. First off, when you open the files like this, it shows you the differences. Now notice there's almost nothing different except for this one file line right here. It speeds up your time for searching, really making this very quick. So what you see here is that those changes were made, and if you click on this file, you'll see that actually this line was added. In this file something was changed, and in this file something was added. As you scroll up and down, both files go together, and if we go to one that's really long, this one's a little bit longer, you'll notice there's a little tick here on the side, and that tells you, as you're scrolling up and down, approximately where the changes are made. So you can see if there are several lines here on the side, it's an easy way to index where everything has been changed. So you can quickly scan and find out what's done. You can also then click here. If you say you don't agree with this change, you can remove it, and it'll bring it back to the original. Likewise here, you can bring this change back. If you click here, it'll actually revert the change. Now, that kind of defeats the purpose unless the patch has some problems and you're trying to correct the patch or you're trying to add something to the patch. So you can see how to use all of this. Now I'm going to close all these files, and if I click here, you'll see this is an entire list of all the files that were changed. It's a lot. And I'm just going to go ahead and close them all. The easiest way is just quick keyboard close command. Let's see, we've changed just one or two lines on most of these installation files. Oops, went too far. And I want to open my window back for projects. So you can see here also those little blue dots indicate the folders or where the changes were made. So if you see a little blue dot, something inside of that folder has been changed. And if it's a blue file like this, it means this file has been changed. And you also see here this little blue line on the left shows you what's been changed. This line has been added, or this one has been changed. And in some other cases, if I go into the plugins, most of those were added, and they'll be green. So a green line means added. And it also, if you click on it, gives you the option to, you can remove it. You can see the differences again if you want to see the two side by side. So you have lots of options and ways to work with a patch in order to dissect it and maybe modify it just a little bit. You say maybe 95% of the patch is good. There's just one or two lines that need to be removed or changed, and you have a quick way of seeing all of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and fold up these folders. Now what we want to do is to create a patch. And the thing about creating a patch is we have to have something to change. And right now, since we've already applied this patch, and you can see these things have been changed, technically the patch has been applied making those files changed, meaning that our working copy here is different than the trunk. And the problem is that if we want to start working on another issue, our patch would try to create a file that indexes these changes that we've already applied and whatever changes we create in the process of fixing the other bug. So first thing we need to do is reset everything, get back to the basics, sync up with the current trunk, and get rid of all of our modifications. So I come to the source files folder here, the subversion, revert modifications. Revert local changes, and also remove newly added files and folders. Click revert, and it'll take a moment. You'll see it down here. Okay, it says that it's done, and it'll also change. These little dots will disappear, and now everything seems to be back and reset. So let's say we need to create a patch, because if we go in and look at the libraries in the Joomla, we find out, I'm going to open up the version file. We find out that the version number is wrong. It should actually be 1.6.0, and we want to make a patch for that. All we need to do is make that change. You see that the blue line changed indicator has shown up, and once we hit the save button, the file name actually goes blue over here as well. You'll see that we get also these blue markers. So everything in the system will be synced up really well. You'll be able to see any of the files you change. And if you want to create that patch now, we first have to follow the same guidelines by creating the patch from the root. So I'm going to close this, but we're going to create a patch. And so you click on the source files to start at the root and come up to team. We want to export a diff patch. Let's call it rename.patch. I'll click save. And you'll see here a patch file has been created. Now you want to look through it quickly just to make sure that everything makes sense. You want to make sure that these links here are relative. So if you notice that this has a full path, there might be something wrong. It needs to be a relative link from the base of the Joomla installation. And maybe you want to make sure that there's also not a lot of extra information. Perhaps you missed something that was there, and you don't want to have that exposed in your patch. So in our case, you can see here, this line was removed and this line was added. That's the way that the patch will notice a change in a line. It also includes some lines before and some lines after just for reference. And you can see it tells you a little bit more information that will be useful for the program that will be comparing them. In this case, it looks like we should probably remove this installation index that might have something to do with renaming our installation folder. So I'm just going to hit remove, delete that. And lastly, we have these few lines at the very top. It says the patch was generated by Netbeans. You can leave it there. There's nothing wrong. It's commented out, basically, is what this does. What I'm going to do is just put patch by and then by me and the date just to help in case somebody looks at it and thinks, who did this? When did they do it? You have that information now. And it will be commented out. And I'm just going to delete the rest of this because it's not important. And now we have a patch file. I'm just going to save those changes, and I could upload this into the tracker, and other people should be able to apply it and see the changes and be able to verify that they actually fixed the problem. So now we've applied a patch, created a patch. There's a few things that I just want to finish with before we close this, and that's a few tips and tricks that you can use with NetBeans. By no means is this the only way to use NetBeans. Maybe there are some better ways to do these things, but for the most part this has been one way to get inside of the Joomla SVN through NetBeans. So first I'm just going to revert everything back because I don't want any trouble. The library should go back to the way it was. But I want to show you some features of NetBeans and why I like it more than some others. And so let's go into just a random file here. You see here, there's a lot of neat features as far as syntax highlighting. You can see things really quickly, and once you get used to the different styles of the syntax highlighting, you'll know exactly what this and that is. So you can see that these are PHP specific words, and these are function calls here. And it also helps you with creating things like the documentation. And you can see the code comments here are also kind of faded to the background just a little bit. One of the great things about NetBeans is how it automatically comes up with code suggestions and also helps you with code navigation. So let's say we're going to start editing a file. I'm just going to pick a random place, and I want to create how about a reference to the document, and I know it's J Factory, I think. I can't remember for sure, and you get a whole list of anything that starts with JF, and there's a whole lot of options, most of them JForm, but I know J Factory is what I want. But actually you want to make sure, in this case, this looks like it's from, yes, it's from a unit testing program, so we want to select this one. Aha, Joomla Factory class. So double click and it will get you into that program, and you'll see now all of the methods that you can use. So I wanted to get the document, and as you go through and click, you get to see all the information. It pulls all of the basically the PHP documenter tags out, tells you the return values and the types and all of the comments right here without even going and looking at the code. However, if you've already coded, and let's say we've closed that, you've already coded this, but you want to see more about get document, or you want to see more about JFactory. If you click on something like this and you right click, you'll see this navigate option, and it says go to test, go to declaration. That's a very useful one for me when I'm working with the framework. So I click on this, and what it does is it opens up where that method is defined. So I can see here what the method does if I want to examine the code a little bit better. I see if there's not a document object already, that it will create it and return it. So it's a singleton pattern here that we get the current document. If it's not already created, it will be created. So it's a really neat way to see the code and to learn more about the framework without having to even leave NetBeans. And lastly, I want to say a little bit about disabling a few things that might speed up NetBeans. At least they did greatly for me. So if we go to Tools, you'll see at the bottom here is Plugins. Click on that, and I've already installed and disabled a few of them, but you'll see there's a bunch that say Base IDE. They come with your NetBeans by default, but you don't need all of them. For example, Hudson. If you're not going to be using Hudson, click on it and deactivate it. Same with Mercurial or CVS. These are access features that I found slowed down NetBeans enough, and once I disabled them, things were very quick. So You can also look for other plugins and things that you want to be able to use. And there's quite a few here in the listing, but there are even more on the website that you can download. So, for instance, if you want to be going through working with the Symfony framework, you could download this and it would provide extra syntax and support for that framework. As well as if, say, you're going to be working with Java, you could download all of the Java plugins and be able to work with Java just like you would if you had downloaded the Java bundled version of Netbeans. So all in all, you're able to do a lot of different things with plugins, and it's a great thing to go through and at least make sure you're using everything that's enabled. If you're not, go ahead and disable it, and it will speed up things just maybe a little bit, maybe a lot. Alright, so I want to close. I don't want to save those changes. This should have given you a quick overview on how to use Netbeans, whether you're using it with the Joomla SVN, making patches, or if you're just using it in general. This should help you with some of the features that it has and some of the ways that you can use it for your own benefit.